Now that it's law, the Online News Act will shape the relationship between these platforms, news outlets, and Canadian citizens. According to the news release from the Government of Canada, this new law will require the largest digital platforms to bargain fairly with Canadian news businesses for the use of their news content on their services. It encourages voluntary commercial agreements, between the platforms and news businesses with minimal government intervention, as well as crucial safeguards to preserve the independence of the press. So I guess what's next? Well, the Department of Canadian Heritage will publish draft regulations outlining how the act should be applied, and the CRTC will provide a plan for how it will be implemented. Once we have those documents to clarify the act, news organizations can initiate mandatory negotiations. I guess they have that power now with these platforms to reach an agreement, and the CRTC will oversee and mediate the negotiation. Mandatory negotiation is an interesting concept. Is this potentially another reason why Google and Meta are taking such a hard stance on this? It sounds like the problem isn't it's the government's decision, but it's the government saying, no, platforms, you have to now negotiate with news outlets individually. It's like the negotiation process is much longer with the CRTC in it. What are our thoughts on that?
It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, simply because in that landscape, I mean, the platforms have all the leverage, especially if you're looking at it like one organization at a time. So it just seems like they're bargaining from such like a disadvantaged place.
That's true, but I think with the law is that like they have to come at least to some compensation for being on their platform.
What if? Oh, that's why they want it that's why they want the CRTC in it. Because I was going to ask, what if it's free? What if they bargain and say it's free because we just need to be on social media, but then the CRTC says no.
But like by law, you have to compensate at least some amount of what you're generating from this.
So let's ask ourselves this. Is this the solution that Canadian journalism needs to fix themselves? And if not, what is?
I mean, here's the thing, like time will tell. So we're gonna find out. Another concern is if you have Meta, Google actually now paying into Canadian media, what kind of influence does that have over the long term? How does that affect us if those are now some of the biggest customers of Canadian media? Is
there going to be some sort of influence there?
Absolutely. Okay. Your biggest customers will always have influence on your product.
Propose to me a better solution then. What is going to save? I have an interesting stat.
There was no problem to begin with.
There was none? Really? Okay, well, at least 1/3 of Canadian journalism jobs disappeared between 2010 and 2016.
And so did taxis when Uber came about. So there's a thing to be said about the fact that society changes, culture changes, media changes, what people want to see changes. You got to adapt.
So news outlets just have to adapt.
It wasn't like a Canadian-specific problem. You know, news outlets across the world in different markets were closing and shuttering simply because, you know, if you had a printing press and you were really good at pumping out newspapers, well, no one's reading the newspaper anymore. You're going to go out of business. That's just a fact.
Is there something to be said about the government maybe feeling like they're losing control because they had a lot on broadcast that now they're saying we need to gain control of the technology boom of news on technology?
I think that's kind of the way of adapting to it, to be honest, because like how else would you adapt to it if you're a news outlet?
In what sense?
Like what would be your alternative to generate revenue for a news outlet that's based in Canada? Obviously, we know news are important. We want them to be generated in Canada.
Outlets, you grow enough of a bigger following that, you know, you can get sponsorships, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's plenty of like organic. There's people that have come from like nothing and that have created like media
empires
now.
Like a Joe Rogan podcast, for instance, like people want to listen to that kind of stuff. They want to hear normal people talking and having varying opinions. And when you look at a lot of the news media, especially in Canada, we have a majority political standpoint.
So interesting. So basically we need to say to news outlets, hey, adapt with the times, get on social media, start learning and growing in that sense. Guys, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. The government has been clear that the intention of the Online News Act is to create fairness between digital platforms and news outlets for the benefit of Canadians. But its impact remains to be seen. The way in which this act is interpreted and implemented will ultimately determine how Canadians access news content and will shape the future of Canadian journalism forever. If there's anything we can collect from today's episode, be mindful of our government policies and the discussions they have. It's crucial to understand the changes our government is making in Canada so we can be more informed for future voting. Does this bill align with your beliefs? Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week with another episode of My Generation. In the meantime, we definitely want to hear from you. Join the conversation at My Generation on all social media platforms. And with that, we'll end off with this. Do not simply accept what you are told. Challenge your thinking, engage in differences, and listen to new perspectives.